Something that you talk about a lot in your books and also in the conversations I've watched online is creating this relationship with psilocybin mushrooms and sort of facilitating more of like a long-term practice with engaging with these mushrooms. But who or what are you actually in a relationship with?
Wow, speaking of getting right into it, big questions. Yeah, so I do believe that irrespective of the what we believe we're interacting with, it does serve us to engage with it as a kind of relationship. And by that I mean it doesn't necessarily matter if I believe that I'm in a relationship with my own inner healing intelligence through the molecule psilocybin, or if I believe I'm just navigating a dynamic of an experience, or if I'm in communion with an other beyond me, the spirit of the mushroom, or if through the mushroom I'm in communion with larger patterns of energy, a larger web of life. Each of those things have their own quality and have their sort of pros and cons depending on how maybe overzealous we get with assumptions of external authority that come with the thing that we perceive ourselves as interacting with. But ultimately what matters is that we enter into a relationship with it. And the reason why I say that is because I have this terminology that I use, that a relationship works, it functions like a container and a conduit and a crucible for meaning. And so within the container of the relationship we have with psilocybin, it gives us an opportunity to build over time, for things to change over time, for things to evolve over time, for us within it and for our perspective of that which we're relating with and the relationship itself. Personal beliefs aside for a second, I think it's fair to say that what we're interacting with at least is experiential changes in our subjective awareness brought on by the catalyst of consuming an exogenous molecule. From there, we can ask, well, what is this thing that's arising? What is it? A spirit of a thing? Is it just me? Is it me and another thing? Is it another thing through and as me? Is it multiple things? And that's when we can get into the sort of richness of our sort of spiritual models or philosophical models for what we're interacting with. For me personally, I feel that it works well to perceive as though I'm interacting with an entity that is the spirit of the mushroom or the mushrooms themselves, which I call them psilocybin or the mushroom. But not to believe that that is the case so strongly that I lose my capacity to recognize that anywhere from 1 to 99.9% of what I see in that experience is reflections of my own mind. The reason why I think that balance is important is because it's very easy to overly project, like I said, our internal authority onto this thing that we perceive as external, or for myself, I believe is external. And then we start saying things like, well, the mushroom told me this, and so I'll do that. Or the mushroom told me this, so it must be true. But actually, did the mushroom tell you that? Or did you just tell that to yourself while on mushrooms? Or did the mushroom tell you that to show you that that's what you think, not to tell you that that's what's true? Right. And so it's impossible to tease these things out. And so in the navigation of the experience and in integrating that experience over time in our lives so that it's not just these pockets of wow or whatever, and then we move from pocket to pocket, it's something that exists in our relationship over time. And so that we can properly keep ourselves and our own autonomy in relationship with that thing, I think it's important to stay in a relationship with a thing that we believe we're interacting with and can develop a relationship with, but always with the mindfulness that, yeah, and it's possible that I could completely misunderstand what it's saying, and all of it could actually just be about me and myself. So I should, at the very least, act with as much integrity and ethics as possible in everything that I do out of my experiences. How's that? That's a bit of a start. We'll see. You brought us in real deep, real fast. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to get speaking of the algorithm, got to get people hooked straight away. But it is the most interesting part of your work for me is building this relationship, because all kinds of relationships are complex and everything in life is just your relationship to it. So kind of bringing that framing into using psilocybin for what you call psychospiritual maturation, it's kind of abstract, right? Because even relationships human to human in real life are complex, and we don't often know how to do them, and it hasn't been modeled to us like how best to do them. And when you meet someone that you really like, or you're engaged in a relationship that feels initially really fulfilling, it's so easy to overdose on that relationship and then end up causing resentment or there being fractures. So how, if somebody was to take this framework and run with it, like how would they structure building a relationship with something like psilocybin?
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, or like that further sort of expands on what I was saying there, which I think is great. Another reason why it's important to think about this from the perspective of a relationship is that it's easy to anthropomorphize a relationship, and there's problems in anthropomorphizing things, of course, but in this instance, it gives us an opportunity to consider, like, how am I treating this thing? How am I showing up to this experience? Or like, how I show up to this experience has a huge impact on what I'm going to get out of it and what will be possible through it. Even just that language, what am I going to get out of this? If I show up to this and go like, what am I going to get out of you? I'm defining a kind of relationship. Or if I show up being like, well, what's possible between you and I right now? Right? Like, how much is available here, and what is that thing that's available if I show up with respect versus if I show up with this extractive mindset, or if I show up with care, and in particular to psilocybin, I show up with a receptivity to learn, recognizing that could get real intense and full on, and I won't like any of it. And I still ultimately probably want to just stay curious and open and let it all happen. What can I get out of that, as opposed to being like, I'm just trying to have a good time. And if anything isn't good, I'm going to distract myself as much as possible because I'm taking these mushrooms to have some fun. When we think about it in terms of relationship, we have an opportunity to think about, how do I show up to this thing, both in my behavior, my approach, and how I regard that thing, and what's possible in the relationship as a consequence of my choices. And so how do we start with our relationship with mushrooms? I think that's different for every single person, but I think the most basic ones is to, when we're taking mushrooms, we're doing so because we want to, that is our choice, and there's no other reason. Like, there can be lots of other reasons, but I'm not choosing to do it because I think I'm supposed to, or my friends want me to, or it's there and I probably should, or it's the only way that's going to fix my depression, my anxiety, my trauma, my writer's block, whatever it is. The number one way to start this relationship is to ensure that you're starting it because you're choosing to, and that's your decision. From there, I think it's incredibly important to ensure that we do our due diligence, that we are creating a safe context for our explorations with this mushroom or this molecule. And that looks different for every person, but it means creating an external safe context in terms of where we are and who we're with, the presence of cues of safety, so people that are there to like help us calm down or remind us to breathe, or soft music or soft pillows or soft lighting, and then also the absence of danger. There's no sharp pointy things, there isn't traffic, there isn't somebody that's going to be screaming or whatever it is, right? And then we're doing our best to also try to go in and create an internal safe context as much as possible, which has to do with, are we able to be in the experience without freaking out? And if we are going to freak out, we have someone or something around us that can work as a sort of exogenous safe context, that we can feel safe with them even while we're freaking out in ourselves. On top of that is a consideration of also from the sense of like, where am I at in my life right now? And what am I looking to achieve with this experience? As well as what is my family and genetic history? What is my past mental health history? That we consider all of those in terms of, internally, is it safe for me to consume this substance? And given what the possible risks are, do I have the internal or external stability to compensate for those risks if they go towards the worst? Sure that we have something to respond to the worst, because if we have something to respond to the worst, we likely can manage the rest pretty well. And the last part of all of that is ensuring that the amount that we take for the first time is contextually appropriate to where we're at. If it's my first time, probably not the best choice to take 5 dry grams alone in silent darkness, right? Probably not the best call. Maybe you'd be vibes. Maybe it'd be great. It's probably not the best call. Maybe if you're held in a container with another person, 5 dried grams works, Maybe you take just a half a gram and sit in the forest by yourself. Maybe you make sure there's a friend there, or a friend on call, or you have a facilitator, or so on and so forth. Again, the presence of internal and external safety cues and the sort of contextual safety and stability will give us an understanding of to what degree on a dose level we would be able to go beyond our capacities and still remain within that safe context as much as possible. For most people, that means start low, go slow, be with others, ideally skilled others. hasn't experienced others.
I think you're kind of pointing at something throughout your answer to that question, but I just want to name it. If somebody is looking to utilize these substances to resolve and alchemize trauma, how does that mean that their relationship with the mushrooms has to look different, perhaps, to somebody that is using psilocybin because they're after some sort of self-gnosis, or they want to do, I guess, a type of psychospiritual maturation that is lighter than having to resolve horrific childhood trauma?
Sort of like, what level of safety does somebody need when they're deciding to have a campfire in the backyard versus the kind of safety someone's going to need to do a controlled burn, right? So it's like the likelihood of one going really bad compared to the other. It's impossible to know. Maybe you're going in and you're like, I'm just going to have 1.5 grams and dance with my friends at, I don't know, Rainbow Serpent or something. You're in Australia, right? And then you end up having all this stuff coming up that you weren't anticipating. This speaks to another thing, is to educate yourself as much as possible before consuming mushrooms. Don't go too much. That can be a little overbearing, but really educate yourself, right? In terms of going in for trauma, I think that it is absolutely essential that you have some other person with you that you feel safe with, and ideally is skilled and experienced. And the reason I say that is because part of trauma most of the time is this profound sense of having lost your sense of safety. The likelihood that whatever it is that you're most afraid of in all of that, whatever it is that you're avoiding or trying to get away from or trying to force or whatever it might be, whatever that intense thing is likely going to come up again. And it's going to come up in ways that are large, big, completely outside your control. And like a controlled burn, this can be incredibly powerful and positive if you don't make it worse by then also freaking out, by it also becoming another thing that is upsetting or traumatic, such as, entering into an experience of dissociation, or just a really huge, scary experience. Even if you have safe people around you, you're so far out that they can't even bring you down into a queue of safety. Any kind of psychedelic molecules with trauma requires a very cautious approach and a really considerate approach to ensure that you have people there to help you feel safe to face what's coming up, and can also be there with you to process that afterwards, or to help you recover if things go very poorly. Usually this also means having that same person be somebody you're working with beforehand, so you get a pretty clear sense of what it is that's probably going to come up and how it might come up, that it doesn't come at you unexpectedly.
Yeah, there's a few things that you touched on that kind of stood out to me. First of all, what do you think that it means for someone to be skilled and experienced enough to guide someone else through a psychedelic process? And I ask this in light of how much media coverage there is at the moment for psychedelic-assisted therapy. And I've been trying to work this thing out in my head around like I would obviously want someone who had taken the substances themselves before, but from what I hear from people undergoing the training is that that's not always the case.
First and foremost, when looking for someone, it has to be someone that you feel safe with, right? You feel safe with them and you feel a sense of trust with them. That said, that can also not go well. For example, you end up feeling safe and trustworthy with someone who turns out to be a total charlatan or a manipulator or an abuser. That's also a thing. And it could even be a thing 5, 10, 15 sessions in, with 5, 10, 15 sessions up to that point, it all feeling positive. So there's something to be navigated there, of course. Certification and qualification are not the same things, right? You can meet someone who has no certifications, they're absolutely qualified to help you, and people who have all the certifications and they're in no way qualified to help you. You could have people that I've been facilitating mushrooms for 20 years, but actually they're kind of like a kook, and they have no capacity to help you if anything goes terribly wrong. It's really tough to find. The biggest thing is when you find people that have a lot of word of mouth from people that you trust that say, I worked with this person and it went really well. That is a super helpful thing. Some therapists are going to be providing psychedelic therapy and never have had the experience. They're upscaling a huge industry right now, and it's technically still illegal to have the experience, even if you're a therapist. It's changing in Canada. So they're not allowed to have it. Maybe they've got all the skills for trauma and that's all you need, but maybe they don't have the skills to know the value of holding your hand in a powerful moment. And maybe they actually have done psychedelics hundreds of times, but legally they're not allowed to tell you. So it's a really tough landscape. And ultimately it comes down to, do you feel like you could trust this person? You feel safe with this person? And ideally you've had multiple people who you trust who have also worked with this person that said positive things. And you can look and see if there's any weird stuff out there about them. If they're registered through some sort of college, have they had any acts, like any flags against their name or their practice or something? It's such a touchy situation that it's really hard for me to say, like, these are the checkpoints. And if these checkpoints are hit, like, then that's the person you can trust. Because it also depends on what you're looking for. If I'm just looking to have someone, like I'm trying to try a little psychedelics for the first time, I could probably just have someone I know and trust who's never really had psychedelics, but they're down to just like hang out with me for the day. And that would be great. That could be the perfect support I need. But if I'm going in for some deep trauma, I might need somebody who's got deep trauma work. I could go see someone who's got a lot of psychedelic experience, but they have no trauma work experience. So everything's going to be cleansing and cleaning and entities. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that might not land and support you in the way that you need to be supported for the journey that you're on, right? Similarly, you might be going in and everything is going to be about trauma. It's just traumadelic the whole way down by your facilitator, but actually there's so much more to the experience than that. They're actually overly psychologizing what could otherwise be a very spiritual experiences that transcend the very essence of what we believe to be our traumas. Ultimately, ask around, get good word of mouth, and make sure that you feel like you can trust this person.
Yeah, no, sometimes I think with these really complex emerging things, the best advice is just that other people are talking about it and other people are questioning it. And so, I'm sure for people that are listening that are wanting to embark on this journey, just to know that even the educators in the space are asking questions. Something else that I've been trying to work out, what is it that's actually happening between two people in a psychedelic experience? Because I know that boundaries, and you write about this in your book, the boundaries between inner and outer really blend. And there's kind of this feeling of you don't really know where you finish and something else or someone else begins. And so if you're in a space with somebody else and that's happening, that can kind of make things really complicated. I think there's also an opportunity in there to see things as non-dual. Like, what is that?
There is default mode network. There is this on the cognitive neuroscience side of things. There is the dissolution of the sort of perceptual processes that establish like the self versus the other, and versus the what is transpiring. There's communication between the task positive network and the default mode network in ways that they're normally not supposed to be co-activated. There's like all sorts of things that are happening on that end. And subjectively, yeah, you have the experience of like, I am this cup, I am the universe, I am also my feelings, right? Like I am fully immersed. Like normally I have a wall up against this particular thing. I relate with it objectively or whatever it is. I logically separate myself from these experiences and you're immersed in them. You could be with another person and either because of part of this includes an increase in amplification of sensory experience as a consequence of how these perceptual processes are altered by psilocybin. You might be on the nervous system level way more sensitive to the process of other people, to the cues that we're getting all the time, but they're normally filtered out, cues of intonation and temperature and smell and movement, and plus what does it all mean, our whole systems of how to make meaning, how to what's called a process predictive processing, how to sort of generate a hypothesis which we sort of guess as to what we're perceiving on reality and check that against errors to create a working model for what we're interacting with. That's all disrupted. So what does anything mean? New ideas come up. Again, there's an opportunity there of like shared meaning. Wade Richardson, I believe, wrote a book called Psychedelic Mind Meld, this opportunity to maybe have telepathic contact with each other for good or for ill. I think that's one of the big power of psychedelics and ceremony is like being in a large group process. What it is, I don't know. I think we're getting on the edge of mystery. I think one thing that's for sure is we want to be careful not to confuse correlation with causation. Psychedelics, psilocybin, the molecule does this to the brain. Serotonin changes the blood flow and changes the salience versus the task positive versus the default mode network. And that that creates an experience of dissolution, which creates the experience of telepathy or something. Well, no, all of these things are arising simultaneously. Just everything we know about the brain is kind of like a picture of what that looks like neurologically with our explanations. And then subjectively, we have these experiences. And in many ways, we're trying to sort of forge the two and figure out what's going on. But I think ultimately it comes down to trusting the mystery of the thing and learning to navigate it with as much sort of like grace and moral, ethical behavior as possible.
I'm still just thinking about picking a guide or picking someone to have the experience with. And then the way that I'm reading about how psychedelic-assisted therapy is being regulated and how they're trying to make it as safe as possible for everyone involved. Is there a transference that's happening wherein there's actually a lot of opportunity? And should that be something that is acknowledged and like worked towards rather than like completely trying to regulate that away like you would in conventional therapy, keeping the boundaries, in conventional therapy, you keep the boundaries between patient and therapist like very strict and clear.
Okay, so if you're talking about transference in the sense of psychological transference and countertransference, and not transference in the sense of like something passing between us, is that what you mean? Are you talking about it from the psychological terms?
Both, really, both. The psychological, obviously that can't be happening in any therapeutic setting, and you would hope that it wouldn't happen in a psychedelic one where a therapist comes in and they have a need to be needed, and if you don't have the process they want you to have, then that's going to affect the whole thing because their feeling of not being fulfilled in their work with you is going to bleed into your journey. Like obviously that needs to be dealt with. I had a really powerful psychedelic experience that healed something for me that I had been working on in therapy for 10 years on and off and just could never really shift the needle on. And I found out that later that the person that I sat with in the ceremony had actually transformed that experience for themselves. And it was very mysterious and fortuitous that we ended up sitting together. And so I've always had this question mark around, was I able to work on that particular thing? And it wasn't even my intention to work on this particular issue I was facing in my life in that ceremony. Yeah, and I guess I'm just wondering if there is something there, if in your experience that the possibility of somebody who's transformed a particular experience sitting in a room with someone else that wants to transform that themselves is possible through the use of psychedelics.
Is it possible? For sure. You just told me it was possible.
Well,
right?
yeah.
Like,
I mean, is it
'cause it happened
repeatable?
for you. Yeah, and I think it must be repeatable. It's repeatable all the time. You're not the only person to have this kind of experience. I think that's part of the power of sitting in groups, right? Part of the power of sitting in groups. Um, Now, does that make it reasonable to try to like make sure that the other people around you are like trying to select people so that they've already done the work that you want to do? I don't know. Maybe if that's your goal or you're trying to build a group of people and they all want to work on the same thing collectively as one group in their inner experiences and in the sort of interpersonal psychic field, like that's maybe possible as well. But I think we have to be careful in the sense of like trying to make the experience a particular thing by overly controlling it, because it's one of those things where like the real magic, pardon the terminology, but the magic of the thing can get lost the harder we grip for it. And it's almost like we're so focused on making sure it's the thing we want. Like we're so focused on finding the train, catching the train we want to catch that we don't realize it was passing on the tracks behind us. So I think that there's something to that. In terms of transference in psychology, like in a psychotherapist office, that's been a well-observed phenomenon for a very long time. And actually, of course, when you select a psychologist or a psychotherapist, you want someone who's not using you for their own shit, to process their own stuff. But that's what it is to find a skilled a psychotherapist or psychologist. They're supposed to go through training that helps them deal with that. I think this is even more important with psychedelic work because there's so much opportunity for a psychedelic therapist to get aggrandized and not realize that they're projecting things into the client's experience with their subtle cues. Like it's so important for a psychedelic therapist to be doing their own work so that they don't do that and they can recognize their own triggers and stuff. But the dynamic of transference and countertransference is well documented and well understood in any and every trained psychotherapist. And what the psychotherapist is trying to do is, of course, not transfer their inner process onto the other individual, where I've got issues with my mom. And so I make you, my client, my mom, and I'm processing that stuff out. Generally, that's pretty well maintained. What the therapists are trying to avoid is what's called countertransference. Because, say, you and my client, it's totally normal, expected, and can be incredibly positive for you to undergo transference, to project onto me, the therapist, like you projecting your father onto me. When that happens, if that's made conscious, you could relate with that. There's an incredible opportunity there for you to do some work with whatever is lingering from your stuff with your dad through me, as long as I, as a therapist, don't counter transfer and take on that role and make you my daughter. You see, like that's when it gets really sticky. And that's in any psychotherapeutic dynamic. And it's also the case in psychedelic therapy. And it can get more intense because when someone's under the effects of psychedelics, they don't necessarily have the ability to recognize, like, oh, I'm perceiving you as my father right now. They might be just in it and they just are afraid of you or whatever it might be, or they like just want to hold you, or they could project their own, transfer their own sexual stuff onto you. And that, those are really important places to maintain certain boundaries. The boundary isn't to prevent the transference to happen. The boundary is set up to ensure that when it happens, it remains beneficial for the client and doesn't create a context where countertransference or other behaviors can harm the client, intentionally or otherwise. When working with a therapist in psychedelic work, that's just something to keep in mind and to talk with them about, ask them about. Any well-trained psychotherapist, psychedelic or otherwise, is going to be able to answer your questions about that. And if they can't answer your questions about that, that's a cue that you probably can't trust them. In terms of being in a group or more ceremonial work, you could ask your facilitator about that too, right? But I think there's something about kind of going in with a particular set of intentions for yourself and in how you're going to relate to the group, and then being open to the mystery of what happens. And then maybe you happen to be in a scenario like you, where somebody was doing some big processing work that felt like it opened up something for you. I've been in ceremonies. I had the opportunity to sit in ceremony with the late Kalindi Yi, who was a big proponent of doing large mushroom drinks, like 40 plus grams. And
40?
I sat 40, and I sat in a ceremony with him. He wasn't leading. We were all just friends together journeying. And I had the experience of just having a really difficult time. Now, I didn't have as much as him. I was in my still high, but not that high for sure. And I experienced him purging, intense purging, like, whoa, like, and then as soon as he was finished, I felt relieved. I was like, oh, thank you, Kalindi. Like, you just like, you let it out for me. Like that kind of stuff can happen, right? But I think we want to be conscientious that it's like, if we're trying too hard to make sure that we have everyone around us who's going to help us do the processing, and we are trying to specifically ensure that they're doing the different aspects, then that is actually maybe something to look at in ourselves that we should be working on, rather than something we should be trying to actualize.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Speaking of 40 grams, that is the most amount of mushrooms I've ever heard of anyone ever taking. I know now from your work that it's not enough to kill you, but that just feels like beyond what the human mind could even handle. I do want to talk about this this thing that's kind of seems to be within the subculture, at least when I go onto Reddit, people talking about their really big doses of psilocybin mushrooms. I'm talking about 5+ grams, and how we've kind of labeled that 5+ grams as being the heroic dose. And then there's people now, like influencers like Brian Johnson, going and doing it and live streaming it on Twitter, and it's become this kind of thing. How do you feel about that as that being used as kind of like a status symbol? Does that bother you?
I mean, it bothers me and it doesn't bother me. It is what it is. Internet culture is going to do what internet culture does. If anything, what bothers me is just the concern that people who are naive, not in a judgmental way, as in they're new and they don't understand, might be misled by these kinds of posts to think that that's what they're supposed to do. That's what they're supposed to try. I mean, famously, I believe Terrence McKenna, who coined the term heroic dose, 5 dry grams in silent darkness, he would say, like, that's the way to do it. But he didn't have that kind of reach. Like, he said some stuff, he made some really cool impact in the world, and a lot of people followed his stuff more now because of the internet. But he didn't get like 30 million views overnight telling people to take 5 dry grams in silent darkness. So there's concern there for just people getting hurt, either new people coming in or this kind of like hype culture that comes up, and then people start trying these things. And the reality is that a lot of people have these experiences and they don't know what to do with them.
Mm.
Or maybe they went really well, so they do more and they do more and they do more, and they end up kind of becoming a weirdly detached, like strange spiritual bypassing on the edge of almost like a psychotic episode where they've completely disentangled themselves or detached themselves from their personal life, and everything is about spirituality and their journeys, and they can't focus on getting a job because they're trying to focus on their evolution, and like all this kind of stuff can happen if people are going in too high, too intensely, too often. And so there's that level of concern for sure. But ultimately, people are going to do what they're going to do, and this is a part of the, what was it, like the teething phase as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I referred to it in an interview with, oh my goodness, what is her name? She wrote Swimming in the Sacred, Rachel
Rachel
Harris.
Harris.
Yeah, I refer to it as competitive ego deathing. Everyone trying to like one up themselves on like the biggest mushroom doses they can take. And, all the power to them if they can do it. Like I've been in some big mushroom doses, and I could tell you that I'm glad I went there, and I'm not trying to compete with anyone else to try to go back there again, because they weren't easy. And they weren't necessarily not only easy in the experience, but easy to make sense of in my life afterwards. They didn't always feel like they were adding to the value of my life. So there's that concern, and mostly it comes down to cautioning people to just be like, don't probably, unless you're looking for like, what vacuum to buy for life, you probably shouldn't trust Reddit as like the go-to for how you should conduct yourself and what you should do.
That's fair enough. On that subject, with the bigger doses, or I guess maybe with any level of dosage of psilocybin mushrooms, the thing that comes up in the conversation is surrender. This idea of surrender. Yeah, I guess while we're in the realm of talking about big doses, let's talk about what surrender might actually be, or how people could access that when they are journeying on psilocybin.
Well, I'm not certain surrender is something that you do. I think I previously described it as like walking the razor's edge of constantly giving in to surrender, like constantly showing the highest level of control, which is to absolutely release all control. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that you do. It's just a disposition that you allow. I believe Robert Augustus Masters, who's a wonderful author, he said something to the effect of surrender is totally allowing your heart to just swell and be in like all this pain and beauty without attempting to change it in any way. And I think there's something there. It's like just saying, okay, I don't know, or yes, or sure, or I'm scared, or whatever it is. It's just this kind of allowance of whatever is arising, allowing it to be what it is. Usually that relates to a kind of trust. You can trust that whatever is happening is what's happening, and I'm going to be okay. Or the fact that I don't feel okay is part of me being okay. There's all sorts of like maybe layers of psychological navigation that might be happening, but it's ultimately just allowing whatever's happening to happen. That's that. It's so much easier said than done, because sometimes the very thing that is happening that we're like, one thing that I realized that I would face is realizing that I was struggling with surrender because I was trying to surrender, right? Like I'm having this terribly difficult time, and I'm trying so hard to let it happen. I'm trying so hard to surrender. And then it's like, well, stop trying to surrender. And it's like, oh. So now, in terms of when things get really difficult, that's hard. That's really hard, right? That's why when it can be helpful to have cues of safety around you, including another person. If what it is that I need to surrender onto is the experience of being absolutely unsafe, it's nice to be able to look over and see another person smiling and knowing that I created I created context with them that I know that they feel safe. And so I don't have to feel safe because they feel safe. And so I can trust and surrender into not feeling safe.
Yeah, I guess
right?
that's where that transference
And then
does work.
Another
in
layer
a
of
way.
that is when things are too difficult to surrender to, we'll get curious about them. It's like, I don't know how to allow this pain, this fear. Well, then another opportunity in that is to be like, okay, well, what is this fear? Like, what is it that I can't surrender to? As soon as we make the switch of asking what it is, something changes. That's why when you're doing the internal work of preparing, or like being in relationship with the mushroom to do this kind of work solo, where you're working with a guide or a therapist or someone who's helping you prepare, we set the kind of pattern of knowing what it is to be in curiosity versus what it is to be in surrender, so that it's not so difficult to allow those things to happen or to engage that sort of mindset when we're in the journey.
Yeah, I think surrender can become this thing that you're trying to figure out, and it's already hard to figure out what that might be in your normal waking sober life, let alone when, like, the walls are melting and the time and space cease to exist anymore, and you're also trying to figure out, like, what the fuck's even happening in general. Like, how are
Right.
you
And
supposed to?
all that trying to figure it out is also just like grasping. It's attempting to conquer something with, sort of under the conceptual thumb of understanding, which is so far beyond us that every effort we have to do only just burns us. Right. And then it's like, I don't know there. So I don't know is a verbal iteration of getting into this place of like, oh, there's the surrender. I don't know. I can't figure this out. I'm not going to figure this out. I shouldn't even try to figure this out. At least not now. I mean, tomorrow, then you could start figuring it out.
Yeah. After a big glass of water and a shower.
Yeah.
What is a question that you have that you don't see asked very often in psychedelic culture?
Over the last couple of years, as I've focused more and more on writing a new book, and also I went through a pretty difficult time a few years ago, still working through it, when I was in a car accident. I got a head injury, and that really changed the shape of my life and my mind and so on and so forth. I am, and also the explosion of psychedelics. There's just so much going on that, to be entirely forthright, I don't really feel like I'm paying attention to everything that's happening in the culture, because a lot of the things that are happening, it's like, I don't really want to be a part of that. There are certain things that will come up and I'll be like, now that's interesting to talk about. Let's lean on that. Right? Like, that's interesting to me. That's an important event. For example, when Donald Trump, President of the United States, wrote that sort of executive action to create more, I don't know, like open legal pathways for psychedelics in the US, and why he included ibogaine explicitly on top of the psychedelics that already had breakthrough access. Like, that's important and interesting to talk about. Well, what is ibogaine? Like, why did ibogaine come up? Like, this is the only one that has the legitimate risk of death. Why is it being included with these ones that are breakthrough therapy that are otherwise like perfectly safe? And how is that relating to the other people in the room? And how does that relate to sort of intersections of trying to create a perceived sense of supporting veterans while also making more trauma by sending soldiers to war? Like, there's all sorts. These are interesting questions, but there's a bunch of other stuff that kind of comes up and comes down in psychedelic culture that, in some ways, I'm like, I don't care. That's not what I'm trying to focus on in the long run. Like, I'm really trying to focus on, how do we work with these things in ways that we become better people? It's tough because I'm a content creator, so I kind of also have to try to stay on trend in some ways, but ultimately, like, I don't really care about what's trending. I care about, like, asking these deeper questions.
Okay.
I surrender to the fact that I don't know.
Perfect. Well, I actually think that's a nice place to wrap up this episode. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and I am looking forward to jumping more into your personal experiences in the next episode.